The Tin Woodman of Oz by L. Frank Baum. Chapter 14. The Green Monkey. They now entered the house, and, as an interested group, watched Ginger at Ozma's command build a fire and put a kettle of water over to boil. The ruler of Oz stood before the fire, silent and grave, while the others, realizing that an important ceremony of magic was about to be performed, stood quietly in the background so as not to interrupt Ozma's proceedings. Only Polychrome kept going in and coming out, humming softly to herself as she danced, for the Rainbow's daughter could not keep still for long, and the four walls of her room always made her nervous and ill at ease. She moved so noiselessly, however, that her movements were like the shifting of sunbeams and did not annoy anyone. When the water in the kettle bubbled, Ozma drew from her bosom 2 tiny packets containing powders. These powders she threw into the kettle, and after briskly stirring the contents with a branch from a macaroon bush, Ozma poured the mystic broth upon a broad platter which Ginger had placed upon the table. As the broth cooled, it became as silver, reflecting all objects from its smooth surface like a mirror. While her companions gathered round the table eagerly attentive, and Dorothy even held little Toto in her arms that he might see, Ozma waved her wand over the mirror-like surface. At once it reflected the interior of Yoop Castle, and in the big hall sat Mrs. Yoop in her best embroidered silken robes, engaged in weaving a new lace apron to replace the one she had lost. The giantess seemed rather uneasy, as if she had a faint idea that someone was spying upon her, for she kept looking behind her and this way and that, as though expecting danger from an unknown source. Perhaps some Yookoohoo instinct warned her. Woot saw that she had escaped from her room by some of the magical means at her disposal after her prisoners had escaped her. She was now occupying the big hall of her castle as she used to do. Also, Woot thought from the cruel expression on the face of the giantess that she was planning revenge on them as soon as her new magic apron was finished. But Ozma was now making passes over the platter with her silver wand, and presently the form of the giantess began to shrink in size and to change its shape. And now in her place sat the form of Woot the Wanderer, and as if suddenly realizing her transformation, Mrs. Yoop threw down her work, rushed to a looking-glass that stood against the wall of her room. When she saw the boy's form reflected as her own, she grew violently angry and dashed her head against the mirror, smashing it to atoms. Just then, Ozma was busy with her magic wand, making strange figures, and she had also placed her left hand firmly upon the shoulder of the green monkey. So now, as all eyes were turned upon the platter, the form of Mrs. Yoop gradually changed again. She was slowly transformed into the green monkey, and at the same time Woot slowly regained his natural form. It was quite a surprise to them all when they raised their eyes from the platter and saw Woot the Wanderer standing beside Ozma, and when they glanced at the platter again, it reflected nothing more than the walls of the room in Ginger's house in which they stood. The magic ceremonial was ended, and Ozma of Oz had triumphed over the wicked giantess. "What will become of her, I wonder?" said Dorothy as she drew a long breath. "She will always remain a green monkey," replied Ozma, "and in that form she will be unable to perform any magical arts whatsoever. She need not be unhappy, however, and as she lives all alone in her castle, she probably won't mind the transformation very much after she gets used to it." "Anyhow, it serves her right," declared Dorothy, and all agreed with her. "But," said the kind-hearted Tin Woodman, "I'm afraid the green monkey will starve, for Mrs. Yoop used to get her food by magic, and now that the magic is taken away from her, what can she eat?" "Why, she'll eat what other monkeys do," returned the Scarecrow. "Even in the form of a green monkey she's a very clever person, and I'm sure her wits will show her how to get plenty to eat." "Don't worry about her," advised Dorothy. "She didn't worry about you, and her condition is no worse than the condition she imposed upon poor Woot. She can't starve to death in the land of Oz, that's certain, and if she gets hungry at times, it's no more than the wicked thing deserves. Let's forget Mrs. Yoop, for in spite of her being a Yookoohoo, our fairy friends have broken all of her transformations." The end of Chapter 14. The Tin Woodman of Oz by L. Frank Baum. Chapter 15. The Man of Tin. Ozma and Dorothy were quite pleased with Woot the Wanderer, whom they found modest and intelligent and very well-mannered. The boy was truly grateful for his release from the cruel enchantment, and he promised to love, revere, and defend the girl ruler of Oz forever afterward as a faithful subject. "You may visit me at my palace if you wish," said Ozma, "where I will be glad to introduce you to two other nice boys, Ojo the Munchkin and Button-Bright." "Thank your Majesty," replied Woot, and then he turned to the Tin Woodman and inquired, "What are your further plans, Mr. Emperor? Will you still seek Nimmy-Ammy and marry her, or will you abandon the quest and return to the Emerald City on your own castle?" The Tin Woodman, now as highly polished and well-oiled as ever, reflected a while on this question, and then answered, "Well, I see no reason why I should not find Nimmy-Ammy. We are now in the Munchkin country where we are perfectly safe, and if it was right for me before our enchantment to marry Nimmy-Ammy and make her Empress of the Winkies, it must be right now when the enchantment has been broken and I am once more myself. Am I correct, friend Scarecrow?" "You are indeed," answered the Scarecrow. "No one can oppose such logic." "But I'm afraid you don't love Nimmy-Ammy," suggested Dorothy. "That is just because I can't love anyone," replied the Tin Woodman. "But if I cannot love my wife, I can at least be kind to her, and all husbands are not able to do that." "Do you suppose Nimmy-Ammy still loves you after all these years?" asked Dorothy. "I'm quite sure of it, and that is why I am going to her to make her happy. Woot the Wanderer thinks I ought to reward her for being faithful to me after my meat body was chopped to pieces and I became tin. What do you think, Ozma?" Ozma smiled as she said, "I do not know your Nimmy-Ammy, and so I cannot tell what she most needs to make her happy. But there is no harm in your going to her and asking her if she still wishes to marry you. If she does, we will give you a grand wedding at the Emerald City, and afterward, as Empress of the Winkies, Nimmy-Ammy would become one of the most important ladies in all Oz." So it was decided that the Tin Woodman would continue his journey, and that the Scarecrow and Woot the Wanderer should accompany him as before. Polychrome also decided to join their party, somewhat to the surprise of all. "I hate to be cooped up in a palace," she said to Ozma, "and of course the first time I meet my rainbow I shall return to my own dear home in the skies, where my fairy sisters are even now awaiting me, and my father is cross because I get lost so often. But I can find my rainbow just as quickly while traveling in the Munchkin country as I could if living in the Emerald City, or any other place in Oz. So I shall go with the Tin Woodman and help him woo Nimmy-Ammy." Dorothy wanted to go too, but as the Tin Woodman did not invite her to join his party, she felt she might be intruding if she asked to be taken. She hinted, but she found he didn't take the hint. It is quite a delicate matter for one to ask a girl to marry him, however much she loves him, and perhaps the Tin Woodman did not desire to have too many looking on when he found his old sweetheart Nimmy-Ammy. So Dorothy contented herself with the thought that she would help Ozma prepare a splendid wedding feast to be followed by a round of parties and festivities when the Emperor of the Winkies reached the Emerald City with his bride. Ozma offered to take them all in the Red Wagon to a place as near to the Great Munchkin Forest as a wagon could get. The Red Wagon was big enough to seat them all, and so, bidding goodbye to Jinjur, who gave Woot a basket of ripe cream puffs and caramels to take with him, Ozma commanded the wooden sawhorse to start, and the strange creature moved swiftly over the lanes and presently came to the road of yellow bricks. This road led straight to a dense forest where the path was too narrow for the Red Wagon to proceed farther, so here the party separated. Ozma and Dorothy and Toto returned to the Emerald City after wishing their friends a safe and successful journey, while the Tin Woodman, the Scarecrow, Woot the Wanderer, and Polychrome the Rainbow's Daughter prepared to push their way through the thick forest. However, these forest paths were well known to the Tin Man and the Scarecrow, who felt quite at home among the trees. "I was born in this grand forest," said Nick Chopper, the Tin Emperor, speaking proudly, "and it was here that the witch enchanted my axe, and I lost different parts of my meat body until I became all tin. Here also, for it is a big forest, Nimmy-Ammy lived with the wicked witch, and at the other edge of the trees stands the cottage of my friend Q-Clip, the famous tinsmith who made my present beautiful form. He must be a clever workman, declared Woot admiringly. "He is simply wonderful," declared the Tin Woodman. "I shall be glad to make his acquaintance," said Woot. "If you wish to meet with real cleverness," remarked the Scarecrow, "you should visit the Munchkin farmer who first made me. I won't say that my friend the Emperor isn't all right for a Tin Man, but any judge of beauty can understand that a Scarecrow is far more artistic and refined." "You are too soft and flimsy," said the Tin Woodman. "You are too hard and stiff," said the Scarecrow, and this was as near to quarreling as the two friends ever came. Polychrome laughed at them both, as well she might, and Woot hastened to change the subject. At night they all camped underneath the trees. The boy ate green puffs for supper and offered Polychrome some, but she preferred other food, and at daybreak sipped the dew that was clustered thick on the forest flowers. Then they tramped onward again, and presently the Scarecrow paused and said, "It was on this very spot that Dorothy and I first met the Tin Woodman, who was rusted so badly that none of his joints would move. But after we had oiled him up, he was as good as new, and accompanied us to the Emerald City." "Ah, that was a sad experience," asserted the Tin Woodman soberly. "I was caught in a rainstorm while chopping down a tree for exercise, and before I realized it, I was firmly rusted in every joint. There I stood, axe in hand, but unable to move for days and weeks and months. Indeed, I have never known exactly how long the time was, but finally along came Dorothy, and I was saved. See, this is the very tree I was chopping at the time I rusted." "You cannot be far from your old home, in that case," said Woot. "No, my little cabin stands not a great way off, but there is no occasion for us to visit it. Our errand is with Nimmy Ammy, and her house is somewhat farther away to the left of us." "Didn't you say she lives with a wicked witch who makes her a slave?" asked the boy. "She did, but she doesn't," was the reply. "I am told the witch was destroyed when Dorothy's house fell on her, so now Nimmy Ammy must live all alone. I haven't seen her, of course, since the witch was crushed, for at that time I was standing rusted in the forest and had been there a long time. But the poor girl must have felt very happy to be free from her cruel mistress." "Well," said the Scarecrow, "let's travel on and find Nimmy Ammy. Lead on, your Majesty, since you know the way, and we will follow." So the Tin Woodman took a path that led through the thickest part of the forest, and they followed it for some time. The light was dim here because vines and bushes and leafy foliage were all about them, and often the Tin Man had to push aside the branches that obstructed their way, or cut them off with his axe. After they had proceeded some distance, the Emperor suddenly stopped short and exclaimed, "Good gracious!" The Scarecrow, who was next, first bumped into his friend and then peered around his tin body and said in a tone of wonder, "Well, I declare!" Woot the Wanderer pushed forward to see what was the matter and cried out in astonishment, "For goodness' sake!" Then the three stood motionless, staring hard, until Polychrome's merry laughter rang out behind them and aroused them from their stupor. In the path before them stood a Tin Man who was the exact duplicate of the Tin Woodman. He was of the same size, he was jointed in the same manner, and he was made of shining tin from top to toe. But he stood immovable, with his tin jaws half parted and his tin eyes turned upward. In one of his hands was held a long, gleaming sword. Yes, there was the difference, the only thing that distinguished him from the Emperor of the Winkies. This Tin Man bore a sword, while the Tin Woodman bore an axe. "It's a dream! It must be a dream!" gasped Woot. "That's it, of course," said the Scarecrow. "There couldn't be two Tin Woodmen." "No," agreed Polychrome, dancing nearer to the stranger. "This one is a tin soldier. Don't you see his sword?" The Tin Woodman cautiously put out one tin hand and felt of his double's arm. Then he said in a voice that trembled with emotion, "Who are you, friend?" There was no reply. "Can't you see? He's rusted just as you were once," asked Polychrome, laughing again. "Here, Nick Chopper, lend me your oil can a minute." The Tin Woodman silently handed her his oil can, without which he never traveled, and Polychrome first oiled the stranger's tin jaws, and then worked them gently to and fro until the tin soldier said, "That's enough. Thank you. I can now talk, but please, oil my other joints." Woot seized the oil can and did this, but all the others helped wiggle the soldier's joints as soon as they were oiled until they moved freely. The tin soldier seemed highly pleased at his release. He strutted up and down the path, saying in a high, thin voice, "The soldier is a splendid man when marching on parade, and when he meets the enemy he never is afraid. He rights the wrongs of nation, his country's flag defends. The foe he'll fight with great delight, but seldom fights his friends." The end of Chapter 15. The Tin Woodman of Oz by L. Frank Baum. Chapter 16. Captain Fighter. "Are you really a soldier?" asked Woot, when they had all watched this strange tin person parade up and down the path and proudly flourish his sword. "I was a soldier," was the reply, "but I've been a prisoner to Mr. Rust so long that I don't know exactly what I am." "But, dear me," cried the Tin Woodman, sadly perplexed, "how came you to be made of tin?" "That," answered the soldier, "is a sad, sad story. I was in love with a beautiful Munchkin girl who lived with a wicked witch. The witch did not wish me to marry the girl, so she enchanted my sword, which began hacking me to pieces. When I lost my legs, I went to the tinsmith, Ku-Klip, and he made me some tin legs. When I lost my arms, Ku-Klip made me tin arms, and when I lost my head, he made me this fine one out of tin. It was the same way with my body, and finally I was all tin. But I was not unhappy, for Ku-Klip made a good job of me, having had experience in making another tin man before me." "Yes," observed the Tin Woodman, "it was Ku-Klip who made me. But tell me, what was the name of the Munchkin girl you were in love with?" "She is called Nimmy-Ammy," said the tin soldier. Hearing this, they were all so astonished that they were silent for a time, regarding the stranger with wondering looks. Finally, the Tin Woodman ventured to ask, "And did Nimmy-Ammy return your love?" "Not at first," admitted the soldier. "When first I marched into the forest and met her, she was weeping over the loss of her former sweetheart, a woodman whose name was Nick Chopper." "That is me," said the Tin Woodman. "She told me he was nicer than a soldier because he was all made of tin and shone beautifully in the sun. She said a tin man appealed to her artistic instincts more than an ordinary meat man, as I was then. But I did not despair, because her tin sweetheart had disappeared and could not be found. And finally, Nimmy-Ammy permitted me to call upon her, and we became friends. It was then that the wicked witch discovered me and became furiously angry when I said I wanted to marry the girl. She enchanted my sword, as I said, and then my troubles began. When I got my tin legs, Nimmy-Ammy began to take an interest in me. When I got my tin arms, she began to like me better than ever, and when I was all made of tin, she said I looked like her dear Nick Chopper, and she would be willing to marry me. The day of our wedding was set, and it turned out to be a rainy day. Nevertheless, I started out to get Nimmy-Ammy because the witch had been absent for some time, and we meant to elope before she got back. As I traveled the forest paths, the rain wetted my joints, but I paid no attention to this because my thoughts were all on my wedding with beautiful Nimmy-Ammy, and I could think of nothing else until suddenly my legs stopped moving. Then my arms rusted at the joints, and I became frightened and cried for help, for now I was unable to oil myself. No one heard my calls, and before long my jaws rusted, and I was unable to utter another sound. So I stood, helpless in this spot, hoping some wanderer would come my way and save me. But this forest path is seldom used, and I have been standing here so long that I have lost all track of time. In my mind I composed poetry and sang songs, but not a sound have I been able to utter. But this desperate condition has now been relieved by your coming my way, and I must thank you for my rescue." "This is wonderful," said the Scarecrow, heaving a stuffy long sigh. "I think Ku-Klip was wrong to make two tin men just alike, and the strangest thing of all is that both you tin men fell in love with the same girl." "As for that," returned the soldier seriously, "I must admit I lost my ability to love when I lost my meat heart. Ku-Klip gave me a tin heart, to be sure, but it doesn't love anything, as far as I can discover, and merely rattles against my tin ribs, which makes me wish I had no heart at all. Yet, in spite of this condition, you are going to marry Nimmy-Ammy?" "Well, you see, I had promised to marry her, and I am an honest man and always try to keep my promises. I didn't like to disappoint the poor girl who had been disappointed by one tin man already. That was not my fault, declared the Emperor of the Winkies, and then he related how he also had rusted in the forest, and after a long time had been rescued by Dorothy and the Scarecrow, and had traveled with them to the Emerald City in search of a heart that could love. "If you have found such a heart, sir," said the soldier, "I will gladly allow you to marry Nimmy Ammy in my place." "If she loves you best, sir," answered the woodman, "I shall not interfere with your wedding her. For, to be quite frank with you, I cannot yet love Nimmy Ammy as I did before I became tin." "Still, one of you ought to marry the poor girl," remarked Woot, "and if she likes tin men, there is not much choice between you. Why don't you draw lots for her?" "That wouldn't be right," said the Scarecrow. "The girl should be permitted to choose her own husband," asserted Polychrome. "You should both go to her and allow her to take her choice. Then she will surely be happy." "That, to me, seems a very fair arrangement," said the Tin Soldier. "I agreed to it," said the Tin Woodman, shaking the hand of his twin to show the matter was settled. "May I ask your name, sir?" he continued. "Before I was so cut up," replied the other, "I was known as Captain Fighter, but afterward I was merely called the Tin Soldier. Well, Captain, if you are agreeable, let us now go to Nimmy Ammy's house and let her choose between us." "Very well, and if we meet the witch, we will both fight her, you with your axe and I with my sword." "The witch is destroyed," announced the Scarecrow, and as they walked away, he told the Tin Soldier of much that had happened in the land of Oz since he had stood rusted in the forest. "I must have stood there longer than I had imagined," he said thoughtfully. The end of Chapter 16. The Tin Woodman of Oz by L. Frank Baum. Chapter 17. The Workshop of Ku-Klip. It was not more than a 2 hours' journey to the house where Nimmy Ammy had lived, but when our travelers arrived there, they found the place deserted. The door was partly off its hinges, the roof had fallen in at the rear, and the interior of the cottage was thick with dust. Not only was the place vacant, but it was evident that no one had lived there for a long time. "I suppose," said the Scarecrow, as they all stood looking wonderingly at the ruined house, "that after the Wicked Witch was destroyed, Nimmy Ammy became lonely and went somewhere else to live." "One could scarcely expect a young girl to live all alone in a forest," added Woot. "She would want company, of course, and so I believe she has gone where other people live." "And perhaps she is still crying her poor little heart out because no tin man comes to marry her," suggested Polychrome. "Well, in that case, it is the clear duty of you two tin persons to seek Nimmy Ammy until you find her," declared the Scarecrow. "I do not know where to look for the girl," said the Tin Soldier, "for I am almost a stranger to this part of the country." "I was born here," said the Tin Woodman, "but the forest has few inhabitants except the wild beasts. I cannot think of anyone living near here with whom Nimmy Ammy might care to live." "Why not go to Ku-Klip and ask him what has become of the girl?" proposed Polychrome. That struck them all as being a good suggestion, so once more they started to tramp through the forest, taking the direct path to Ku-Klip's house, for both the Tin Twins knew the way, having followed it many times. Ku-Klip lived at the far edge of the great forest, his house facing the broad plains of the Munchkin country that lay to the eastward. But when they came to this residence by the forest's edge, the tinsmith was not at home. It was a pretty place, all painted dark blue with trimmings of lighter blue. There was a neat blue fence around the yard, and several blue benches had been placed underneath the shady blue trees which marked the line between forest and plain. There was a blue lawn before the house, which was a good-sized building. Ku-Klip lived in the front part of the house, and had his workshop in the back part, where he had also built a lean-to addition in order to give him more room. Although they found the tinsmith absent on their arrival, there was smoke coming out of his chimney, which proved that he would soon return. "And perhaps Nimmy Ammy will be with him," said the Scarecrow in a cheerful voice. While they waited, the Tin Woodman went to the door of the workshop, and finding it unlocked, entered, and looked curiously around the room where he had been made. "It seems almost like home to me," he told his friends who had followed him in. "The first time I came here, I had lost a leg, so I had to carry it in my hand while I hopped on the other leg all the way from the place in the forest where the enchanted axe cut me. I remember that old Kuklip carefully put my meat leg into a barrel. I think that is the same barrel still standing in the yonder corner. And then at once he began to make a tin leg for me. He worked fast and with skill, and I was much interested in the job." "My experience was much the same," said the tin soldier. "I used to bring all the parts of me which the enchanted sword had cut away here to the tinsmith, and Kuklip would put them into the barrel." "I wonder," said Woot, "if those cast-off parts of you two unfortunates are still in that barrel in the corner." "I suppose so," replied the Tin Woodman. "In the land of Oz, no part of a living creature can ever be destroyed." "If that is true, how was that wicked witch destroyed?" inquired Woot. "Why, she was very old and was all dried up and withered before Oz became a fairyland," explained the Scarecrow. "Only her magic arts had kept her alive so long, and when Dorothy's house fell upon her, she just turned to dust and was blown away and scattered by the wind. I do not think, however, that the parts cut away from these two young men could ever be entirely destroyed, and if they are still in those barrels, they are likely to be just the same as when the enchanted axe or sword severed them." "It doesn't matter, however," said the Tin Woodman. "Our tin bodies are more brilliant and durable and quite satisfy us." "Yes, the tin bodies are best," agreed the tin soldier. "Nothing can hurt them, unless they get dented or rusted," said Woot, but both the tin men frowned on him. Scraps of tin of all shapes and sizes lay scattered around the workshop. Also there were hammers and anvils and soldering irons and a charcoal furnace and many other tools such as a tinsmith works with. Against two of the side walls had been built stout workbenches, and in the center of the room was a long table. At the end of the shop, which adjoined the dwelling, were several cupboards. After examining the interior of the workshop until his curiosity was satisfied, Woot said, "I think I will go outside until Kuklip comes. It does not seem quite proper for us to take possession of his house while he is absent." "That is true," agreed the Scarecrow, and they were all about to leave the room when the Tin Woodman said, "Wait a minute," and they halted in obedience to the command. The end of Chapter 17. The Tin Woodman of Oz, by L. Frank Baum. Chapter 18. The Tin Woodman Talks to Himself. The Tin Woodman had just noticed the cupboards and was curious to know what they contained. So he went to one of them and opened the door. There were shelves inside, and upon one of the shelves, which was about on a level with his tin chin, the Emperor discovered a head. It looked like a doll's head, only it was larger, and he soon saw it was the head of some person. It was facing the Tin Woodman, and as the cupboard door swung back, the eyes of the head slowly opened and looked at him. The Tin Woodman was not at all surprised, for in the land of Oz one runs into magic at every turn. "Dear me," said the Tin Woodman, staring hard. "It seems as if I had met you somewhere before. Good morning, sir." "You have the advantage of me," replied the head. "I never saw you before in my life." "Still, your face is very familiar," persisted the Tin Woodman. "Pardon me, but may I ask if you ever had a body?" "Yes, at one time," answered the head, "but that is so long ago I can't remember it." "Did you think," he said with a pleasant smile, "that I was born just as I am? That a head would be created without a body?" "No, of course not," said the other. "But how came you to lose your body?" "Well, I can't recollect the details. You'll have to ask Kuklip about it," returned the head. "For, curious as it may seem to you, my memory is not good since my separation from the rest of me. I still possess my brains, and my intellect is as good as ever, but my memory of some of the events I formerly experienced is quite hazy." "How long have you been in this cupboard?" asked the Emperor. "I don't know." "Haven't you a name?" "Oh, yes," said the head. "I used to be called Nick Chopper when I was a woodman and cut down trees for a living." "Good gracious!" cried the Tin Woodman in astonishment. "If you are Nick Chopper's head, then You are me, or I'm you, or... What relation are we, anyhow?" "Don't ask me," replied the head. "For my part, I'm not anxious to claim relationship with any common manufactured article like you. You may be all right in your class, but your class isn't my class. You're tin." The poor emperor felt so bewildered that for a time he could only stare at his old head in silence. Then he said, "I must admit that I wasn't at all bad-looking before I became tin. You're almost handsome for meat. If your hair was combed, you'd be quite attractive." "How do you expect me to comb my hair without help?" demanded the head indignantly. "I used to keep it smooth and neat when I had arms, but after I was removed from the rest of me, my hair got mussed, and old Kuklip never has combed it for me." "I'll speak to him about it," said the Tin Woodman. "Do you remember loving a pretty Munchkin girl named Nimmy Ammy?" "No," answered the head. "That is a foolish question. The heart in my body, when I had a body, might have loved someone for all I know, but a head isn't made to love, it's made to think." "Oh, do you think, then?" "I used to think." "Oh, you must have been shut up in this cupboard for years and years. What have you thought about in all that time?" "Nothing. That's another foolish question. A little reflection will convince you that I have had nothing to think about, except the boards on the inside of the cupboard door, and it didn't take me long to think of everything about those boards that could be thought of. Then, of course, I quit thinking. And are you happy?" "Happy? What's that?" "Don't you know what happiness is?" inquired the Tin Woodman. "I haven't the faintest idea whether it's round or square or black or white or what it is. And if you will pardon my lack of interest in it, I will say that I don't care." The Tin Woodman was much puzzled by these answers. His traveling companions had grouped themselves at his back, and had fixed their eyes on the head and listened to the conversation with much interest, but until now they had not interrupted, because they thought the Tin Woodman had the best right to talk to his own head and renew acquaintance with it. But now the Tin Soldier remarked, "I wonder if my old head happens to be in any of these cupboards," and he proceeded to open all the cupboard doors. But no other head was to be found on any of the shelves. "Oh, well, never mind," said Woot the Wanderer. "I can't imagine what anyone wants of a cast-off head, anyhow." "I can understand the soldier's interest," asserted Polychrome, dancing around the grimy workshop until her draperies formed a cloud around her dainty form. "For sentimental reasons, a man might like to see his old head once more, just as one likes to revisit an old home. And then to kiss it good-bye," added the Scarecrow. "I hope that tin thing won't try to kiss me good-bye," exclaimed the Tin Woodman's former head. "And I don't see what right you folks have to disturb my peace and comfort, either." "You belong to me," the Tin Woodman declared. "I do not. You and I are one." "We've been parted," asserted the head. "It would be unnatural for me to have any interest in a man made of tin. Please, close the door and leave me alone." "I did not think that my old head could be so disagreeable," said the Emperor. I'm quite ashamed of myself, meaning you." "You ought to be glad that I have enough sense to know what my rights are," retorted the head. "In this cupboard I am leading a simple life, peaceful and dignified, and when a mob of people in whom I am not interested disturb me, they are the disagreeable ones, not I." With a sigh, the Tin Woodman closed and latched the cupboard door and turned away. "Well," said the Tin Soldier, "if my old head would have treated me as coldly and in so unfriendly a manner as your old head has treated you, friend Chopper, I'm glad I could not find it." "Yes, I'm rather surprised at my head myself," replied the Tin Woodman thoughtfully. "I thought I had a more pleasant disposition when I was made of meat." But just then old Kuklip the tinsmith arrived, and he seemed surprised to find so many visitors. Kuklip was a stout man and a short man. He had his sleeves rolled up above his elbows, showing muscular arms, and he wore a leathern apron that covered all the front of him, and was so long that Woot was surprised he didn't step on it and trip whenever he walked. And Kuklip had a grey beard that was almost as long as his apron, and his head was bald on top, and his ears stuck out from his head like two fans. Over his eyes, which were bright and twinkling, he wore big spectacles. It was easy to see that the tinsmith was a kind-hearted man, as well as a merry and agreeable one. "Ho, ho!" he cried in a joyous bass voice. "Here are both my tin men come to visit me, and they and their friends are welcome indeed. I'm very proud of you two characters, I assure you, for you are so perfect that you are proof that I'm a good workman. Sit down, all of you, if you can find anything to sit on, and tell me why you are here." So they found seats and told him all of their adventures that they thought he would like to know. Kuklip was glad to learn that Nick Chopper, the Tin Woodman, was now Emperor of the Winkies and a friend of Ozma of Oz, and the tinsmith was also interested in the Scarecrow and Polychrome. He turned the straw man around, examining him curiously and patting him on all sides, and then said, "You are certainly wonderful, but I think you would be more durable and steady on your legs if you were made of tin. Would you like me to—" "No, indeed," interrupted the Scarecrow hastily. "I like myself better as I am." But to Polychrome, the tinsmith said, "Nothing could improve you, my dear, for you are the most beautiful maiden I have ever seen. It is pure happiness just to look at you." "That is praise indeed from so skilful a workman," returned the Rainbow's daughter, laughing and dancing in and out of the room. "Then it must be this boy you wish me to help," said Kuklip, looking at Woot. "No," said Woot, "we are not here to seek your skill, but have merely come to you for information." Then, between them, they related their search for Nimmy Ammy, whom the Tin Woodman explained he had resolved to marry, yet who had promised to become the bride of the Tin Soldier before he unfortunately became rusted. And when the story was told, they asked Kuklip if he knew what had become of Nimmy Ammy. "Not exactly," replied the old man, "but I know that she wept bitterly when the Tin Soldier did not come to marry her as he had promised to do. The old witch was so provoked at the girl's tears that she beat Nimmy Ammy with her crooked stick, and then hobbled away to gather some magic herbs with which she intended to transform the girl into an old hag, so that no one would again love her or care to marry her. It was while she was away on this errand that Dorothy's house fell on the wicked witch, and she turned to dust and blew away. When I heard this good news, I sent Nimmy Ammy to find the silver shoes which the witch had worn, but Dorothy had taken them with her to the Emerald City." "Yes, we all know about those silver shoes," said the Scarecrow. "Well," continued Kuklip, "after that, Nimmy Ammy decided to go away from the forest and live with some people she was acquainted with who had a house on Mount Munch. I have never seen the girl since." "Do you know the name of the people on Mount Munch with whom she went to live?" asked the Tin Woodman. "No, Nimmy Ammy did not mention her friend's name, and I did not ask her. She took with her all that she could carry of the goods that were in the witch's house, and she told me I could have the rest. But when I went there, I found nothing worth taking except some magic powders that I did not know how to use, and a bottle of magic glue." "What is magic glue?" asked Woot. "It is a magic preparation with which to mend people when they cut themselves. One time, long ago, I cut off one of my fingers by accident. I carried it to the witch, who took down her bottle and glued it on again for me. See," showing them his finger, "it is as good as it ever was." No one else that I ever heard of had this magic glue, and of course when Nick Chopper cut himself to pieces with his enchanted axe, and Captain Fighter cut himself to pieces with his enchanted sword, the witch would not mend them or allow me to glue them together, because she had herself wickedly enchanted the axe and the sword. Nothing remained but for me to make them new parts out of tin. But, as you see, tin answered the purpose very well, and I am sure their tin bodies are a great improvement on their meat bodies." "Very true," said the Tin Soldier. "I quite agree with you," said the Tin Woodman. "I happened to find my old head in your cupboard a while ago, and certainly it is not as desirable a head as the tin one I now wear." "By the way," said the Tin Soldier, "what ever became of my old head, Kuklip?" "And of the different parts of our bodies," added the Tin Woodman. "Let me think a minute," replied Kuklip. "If I remember right, you two boys used to bring me most of your parts when they were cut off, and I saved them in that barrel in the corner. You must not have brought me all the parts, For when I made Chopfight, I had hard work finding enough pieces to complete the job. I finally had to finish him with one arm." "Who is Chopfight?" inquired Woot. "Oh, haven't I told you about Chopfight?" exclaimed Kuklip. "Of course not, and he's quite a curiosity, too. You'll be interested in hearing about Chopfight. This is how he happened. One day, after the witch had been destroyed and Nimmy Ammy had gone to live with her friends on Mount Munch, I was looking around the shop for something and came upon the bottle of magic glue which I had brought from the old witch's house. It occurred to me to piece together the odds and ends of you two people, which of course were just as good as ever, and see if I couldn't make a man out of them. If I succeeded, I would have an assistant to help me with my work, and I thought it would be a clever idea to put to some practical use the scraps of Nick Chopper and Captain Fighter. There were 2 perfectly good heads in my cupboard, and a lot of feet and legs and parts of bodies in the barrel, so I set to work to see what I could do. First, I pieced together a body, gluing it with the witch's magic glue, which worked perfectly. That was the hardest part of my job, however, because the bodies didn't match up well and some parts were missing. But by using a piece of Captain Fighter here and a piece of Nick Chopper there, I finally got together a very decent body with heart and all the trimmings complete." "Whose heart did you use in making the body?" asked the Tin Woodman anxiously. "I can't tell, for the parts had no tags on them, and one heart looks much like another. After the body was completed, I glued 2 fine legs and feet onto it. One leg was Nick Chopper's and one was Captain Fighter's, and finding one leg longer than the other, I trimmed it down to make them match. I was much disappointed to find that I had but one arm. There was an extra leg in the barrel, but I could find only one arm. Having glued this onto the body, I was ready for the head, and I had some difficulty in making up my mind which head to use. Finally, I shut my eyes and reached out my hand toward the cupboard shelf, and the first head I touched I glued upon my new man." "It was mine," declared the tin soldier gloomily. "No, it was mine," answered Kuklip, "for I had given you another in exchange for it, the beautiful tin head you now wear." When the glue had dried, my man was quite an interesting fellow. I named him Chopfight, using a part of Nick Chopper's name and a part of Captain Fighter's name, because he was a mixture of both your cast-off parts. Chopfight was interesting, as I said, but he did not prove a very agreeable companion. He complained bitterly because I had given him but one arm, as if it were my fault, and he grumbled because the suit of blue Munchkin clothes which I got for him from a neighbor did not fit him perfectly. "Ah, that was because he was wearing my old head," remarked the tin soldier. "I remember that head used to be very particular about its clothes." As an assistant, the old tinsmith continued, Chopfight was not a success. He was awkward with tools and was always hungry. He demanded something to eat 6 or 8 times a day, so I wondered if I had fitted his insides properly. Indeed, Chopfight ate so much that little food was left for myself. So, when he proposed one day to go out into the world and seek adventures, I was delighted to get rid of him. I even made him a tin arm to take the place of the missing one, and that pleased him very much, so that we parted good friends." "What became of Chopfight after that?" the Scarecrow inquired. "I never heard. He started off toward the east into the plains of the Munchkin country, and that was the last I ever saw of him." "It seems to me," said the Tin Woodman reflectively, "that you did wrong in making a man out of our cast-off parts. It is evident that Chopfight could, with justice, claim relationship with both of us." "Don't worry about that," advised Kuklip cheerfully. "It is not likely that you will ever meet the fellow, and if you should meet him, he doesn't know who he is made of, for I never told him the secret of his manufacture. Indeed, you are the only ones who know of it, and you may keep the secret to yourselves if you wish to." "Never mind Chopfight," said the Scarecrow. "Our business now is to find poor Nimmy Ammy and let her choose her tin husband. To do that, it seems from the information Kuklip has given us we must travel to Mount Munch." "If that's the program, let us start at once," suggested Woot. So they all went outside, where they found Polychrome dancing out amongst the trees and talking with the birds and laughing as merrily as if she had not lost her rainbow and so been separated from all her fairy sisters. They told her they were going to Mount Munch, and she replied, "Very well. I am as likely to find my rainbow there as here, and any other place is as likely as there. "It all depends on the weather. Do you think it looks like rain?" They shook their heads, and Polychrome laughed again and danced on after them when they resumed their journey. The end of chapter 18. The Tin Woodman of Oz by L. Frank Baum. Chapter 19. The Invisible Country. They were proceeding so easily and comfortably on their way to Mount Munch that Woot said in a serious tone of voice, "I'm afraid something is going to happen." "Why?" asked Polychrome, dancing around the group of travelers. "Because," said the boy thoughtfully, "I've noticed that when we have the least reason for getting into trouble, something is sure to go wrong. Just now, the weather is delightful, the grass is beautifully blue and quite soft to our feet, the mountain we are seeking shows clearly in the distance, and there is no reason anything should happen to delay us in getting there. Our troubles all seem to be over, and, well, that's why I'm afraid," he added with a sigh. "Dear me," remarked the Scarecrow, "what unhappy thoughts you have, to be sure. This is proof that born brains cannot equal manufactured brains, for my brains dwell only on facts and never borrow trouble. When there is occasion for my brains to think, they think, but I would be ashamed of my brains if they kept shooting out thoughts that were merely fears and imaginings such as do no good but are likely to do harm." "For my part," said the Tin Woodman, "I do not think at all, but allow my velvet heart to guide me at all times. The tinsmith filled my hollow head with scraps and clippings of tin," said the soldier, "and he told me they would do nicely for brains, but when I begin to think, the tin scraps rattle around and get so mixed that I'm soon bewildered. So I try not to think. My tin heart is almost as useless to me, for it is hard and cold, so I'm sure the red velvet heart of my friend Nick Chopper is a better guide." "Thoughtless people are not unusual," observed the Scarecrow, "but I consider them more fortunate than those who have useless or wicked thoughts and do not try to curb them. Your oil can, friend Woodman, is filled with oil, but you only apply the oil to your joints drop by drop as you need it, and do not keep spilling it where it will do no good. Thoughts should be restrained in the same way as your oil, and only applied when necessary and for a good purpose. If used carefully, thoughts are good things to have." Polychrome laughed at him, for the Rainbow's daughter knew more about thoughts than the Scarecrow did. But the others were solemn, feeling they had been rebuked, and tramped on in silence. Suddenly Woot, who was in the lead, looked around and found that all his comrades had mysteriously disappeared. But where could they have gone to? The broad plain was all about him, and there were neither trees nor bushes that could hide even a rabbit, nor any hole for anyone to fall into. Yet there he stood, alone. Surprise had caused him to halt, and with a thoughtful and a puzzled expression on his face, he looked down at his feet. It startled him anew to discover that he had no feet. He reached out his hands, but he could not see them. He could feel his hands and arms and body. He stamped his feet on the grass and knew they were there, but in some strange way they had become invisible. While Woot stood wondering, a crash of metal sounded in his ears, and he heard two heavy bodies tumble to the earth just beside him. "Good gracious!" exclaimed the voice of the Tin Woodman. "Mercy me!" cried the voice of the Tin Soldier. "Why didn't you look where you were going?" asked the Tin Woodman reproachfully. "I did, but I couldn't see you," said the Tin Soldier. "Something has happened to my tin eyes. I can't see you even now, nor can I see anyone else." "It's the same way with me," admitted the Tin Woodman. Woot couldn't see either of them, although he heard them plainly, and just then something smashed against him unexpectedly and knocked him over. But it was only the straw-stuffed body of the Scarecrow that fell upon him, and while he could not see the Scarecrow, he managed to push him off and rose to his feet just as Polychrome whirled against him and made him tumble again. Sitting upon the ground, the boy asked, "Can you see us, Polly?" "No, indeed," answered the Rainbow's daughter. "We've all become invisible." "How did it happen, do you suppose?" inquired the Scarecrow, lying where he had fallen. "We have met with no enemy," answered Polychrome, "so it must be that this part of the country has the magic quality of making people invisible, even fairies falling under the charm. We can see the grass and the flowers and the stretch of plain before us, and we can still see Mount Munch in the distance, but we cannot see ourselves or one another." "Well, what are we to do about it?" demanded Woot. "I think this magic affects only a small part of the plain," replied Polychrome. "Perhaps there is only a streak of the country where an enchantment makes people become invisible. So, if we get together and hold hands, we can travel toward Mount Munch until the enchanted streak is past." "All right," said Woot, jumping up. "Give me your hand, Polychrome." "Where are you?" "Here," she answered. "Whistle, Woot, and keep whistling until I come to you." So Woot whistled, and presently Polychrome found him and grasped his hand. "Someone must help me up," said the Scarecrow, lying near them. So they found the straw man and sat him upon his feet, after which he held fast to Polychrome's other hand. Nick Chopper and the Tin Soldier had managed to scramble up without assistance, but it was awkward for them, and the Tin Woodman said, "I don't seem to stand straight somehow, but my joints all work, so I guess I can walk." Guided by his voice, they reached his side, where Woot grasped his tin fingers so they might keep together. The Tin Soldier was standing nearby, and the Scarecrow soon touched him and took hold of his arm. "I hope you're not wobbly," said the straw man, "for if two of us walk unsteadily, we will be sure to fall." "I'm not wobbly," the Tin Soldier assured him, "but I'm certain that one of my legs is shorter than the other. I can't see it to tell what's gone wrong, but I'll limp on with the rest of you until we are out of this enchanted territory." They now formed a line, holding hands, and turning their faces toward Mount Munch, resumed their journey. They had not gone far, however, when a terrible growl saluted their ears. The sound seemed to come from a place just in front of them, so they halted abruptly and remained silent, listening with all their ears. "I smell straw," cried a hoarse, harsh voice with more growls and snarls. "I smell straw, and I'm a hippogiraffe who loves straw and eats all he can find. I want to eat this straw. Where is it? Where is it?" The Scarecrow, hearing this, trembled but kept silent. All the others were silent too, hoping that the invisible beast would be unable to find them. But the creature sniffed the odor of the straw, and drew nearer and nearer to them until he reached the Tin Woodman on one end of the line. It was a big beast, and it smelled of the Tin Woodman and grated 2 rows of enormous teeth against the Emperor's tin body. "Ah, that's not straw," said the harsh voice, and the beast advanced along the line to Woot. "Meat! Pooh! You're no good. I can't eat meat," grumbled the beast, and passed on to Polychrome. "Sweetmeats and perfume, cobwebs and dew, nothing to eat in a fairy like you," said the creature. Now the Scarecrow was next to Polychrome in the line, and he realized if the beast devoured his straw, he would be helpless for a long time, because the last farmhouse was far behind them, and only grass covered the vast expanse of plain. So in his fright he let go of Polychrome's hand and put the hand of the Tin Soldier in that of the Rainbow Daughters. Then he slipped back of the line and went to the other end, where he silently seized the Tin Woodman's hand. Meantime the beast had smelled the Tin Soldier and found he was the last of the line. "That's funny," growled the hippogiraffe. "I can smell straw, but I can't find it. Well, it's here somewhere, and I must hunt around until I do find it, for I'm hungry." His voice was now at the left of them, so they started on, hoping to avoid him, and traveled as fast as they could in the direction of Mount Munch. "I don't like this invisible country," said Woot with a shudder. "We can't tell how many dreadful invisible beasts are roaming around us, or what danger we'll come to next." "Quit thinking about danger, please," said the Scarecrow warningly. "Why?" asked the boy. "If you think of some dreadful thing, it's liable to happen. But if you don't think of it, and no one else thinks of it, it just can't happen. Do you see?" "No," answered Woot. "I won't be able to see much of anything until we escape from this enchantment. But they got out of this invisible strip of country as suddenly as they had entered it, and the instant they got out, they stopped short, for just before them was a deep ditch running at right angles as far as their eyes could see, and stopping all further progress toward Mount Munch. "It's not so very wide," said Woot, "but I'm sure none of us can jump across it." Polychrome began to laugh, and the Scarecrow said, "What's the matter?" "Look at the Tin Men," she said with another burst of merry laughter. Woot and the Scarecrow looked, and the Tin Men looked at themselves. "It was the collision," said the Tin Woodman regretfully. "I knew something was wrong with me, and now I can see that my side is dented in so that I lean over toward the left. It was the soldier's fault. He shouldn't have been so careless." "It is your fault that my right leg is bent, making it shorter than the others, so that I limp badly," retorted the soldier. "You shouldn't have stood where I was walking." "You shouldn't have walked where I was standing," replied the Tin Woodman. It was almost a quarrel, so Polychrome said soothingly, "Never mind, friends. As soon as we have time, I am sure we can straighten the soldier's leg and get the dent out of the woodman's body. The Scarecrow needs patting into shape too, for he had a bad tumble, but our first task is to get over this ditch." "Yes, the ditch is the most important thing just now," added Woot. They were standing in a row, looking hard at the unexpected barrier, when a fierce growl from behind them made them all turn quickly. Out of the invisible country marched a huge beast with a thick, leathery skin and a surprisingly long neck. The head on the top of this neck was broad and flat, and the eyes and mouth were very big, and the nose and ears were very small. When the head was drawn down toward the beast's shoulders, the neck was all wrinkles, but the head could shoot up very high indeed if the creature wished it to. "Dear me," exclaimed the Scarecrow, "this must be the hippogiraffe." "Quite right," said the beast, "and you're the straw which I'm to eat for my dinner. Oh, how I love straw! I hope you don't resent my affectionate appetite." With its 4 great legs, it advanced straight toward the Scarecrow, but the Tin Woodman and the Tin Soldier both sprang in front of their friend and flourished their weapons. "Keep off," said the Tin Woodman warningly, "or I'll chop you with my axe." "Keep off," said the Tin Soldier, "or I'll cut you with my sword." "Would you really do that?" asked the hippogiraffe in a disappointed voice. "We would," they both replied, and the Tin Woodman added, "The Scarecrow is our friend, and he would be useless without his straw stuffing, so, as we are comrades faithful and true, we will defend our friend's stuffing against all enemies." The hippogiraffe sat down and looked at them sorrowfully. "When one has made up his mind to have a meal of delicious straw, and then finds he can't have it, it is certainly hard luck," he said. "And what good is the straw man to you, or to himself, when the ditch keeps you from going any further?" "Well, we can go back again," suggested Woot. "True," said the hippo, "and if you do, you'll be as disappointed as I am. That's some comfort, anyhow." The travelers looked at the beast, and then they looked across the ditch at the level plain beyond. On the other side, the grass had grown tall, and the sun had dried it, so there was a fine crop of hay that only needed to be cut and stacked. "Why don't you cross over and eat hay?" the boy asked the beast. "I'm not fond of hay," replied the hippogiraffe. "Straw is much more delicious, to my notion, and it's more scarce in this neighborhood, too. Also, I must confess that I can't get across the ditch, for my body is too heavy and clumsy for me to jump the distance. I can stretch my neck across, though, and you will notice that I've nibbled the hay on the farther edge, not because I liked it, but because one must eat, and if one can't get the sort of food he desires, he must take what is offered or go hungry." "Ah, I see you are a philosopher," remarked the Scarecrow. "No, I'm just a hippogiraffe," was the reply. Polychrome was not afraid of the big beast. She danced close to him and said, "If you can stretch your neck across the ditch, why not help us over? We can sit on your big head one at a time, and then you can lift us across." "Yes, I can, it is true," answered the hippo, "but I refuse to do it, unless," he added, and stopped short. "Unless what?" asked Polychrome. unless you first allow me to eat the straw with which the Scarecrow is stuffed." "No," said the Rainbow's daughter, "that is too high a price to pay. Our friend's straw is nice and fresh, for he was restuffed only a little while ago." "I know," agreed the Hippogiraffe. "That's why I want it. If it was old, musty straw, I wouldn't care for it." "Please, lift us across," pleaded Polychrome. "No," replied the beast. "Since you refuse my generous offer, I can be as stubborn as you are." After that, they were all silent for a time, but then the Scarecrow said bravely, "Friends, let's us agree to the beast's terms. Give him my straw, and carry the rest of me with you across the ditch. Once on the other side, the tin soldier can cut some of the hay with his sharp sword, and you can stuff me with that material until we reach a place where there is straw. It is true I have been stuffed with straw all my life, and it will be somewhat humiliating to be filled with common hay, but I am willing to sacrifice my pride in a good cause. Moreover, to abandon our errand and so deprive the great Emperor of the Winkies or this noble soldier of his bride would be equally humiliating, if not more so." "You're a very honest and clever man," exclaimed the Hippogiraffe admiringly. "When I have eaten your head, perhaps I also will become clever." "You're not to eat my head, you know," returned the Scarecrow hastily. "My head isn't stuffed with straw, and I cannot part with it. When one loses his head, he loses his brains." "Very well, then. You may keep your head," said the beast. The Scarecrow's companions thanked him warmly for his loyal sacrifice to their mutual good, and then he laid down and permitted them to pull the straw from his body. As fast as they did this, the Hippogiraffe ate up the straw, and when all was consumed, Polychrome made a neat bundle of the clothes and boots and gloves and hat, and said she would carry them, while Woot tucked the Scarecrow's head under his arm and promised to guard its safety. "Now then," said the Tin Woodman, "keep your promise, beast, and lift us over the ditch." But that was a fine dinner," said the Hippo, smacking his thick lips in satisfaction, "and I'm as good as my word. Sit on my head, one at a time, and I'll land you safely on the other side." He approached close to the edge of the ditch and squatted down. Polychrome climbed over his big body and sat herself lightly upon the flat head, holding the bundle of the Scarecrow's raiment in her hand. Slowly the elastic neck stretched out until it reached the far side of the ditch, when the beast lowered its head and permitted the beautiful fairy to leap to the ground. Woot made the queer journey next, and then the Tin Soldier and the Tin Woodman went over, and all were well pleased to have overcome this serious barrier to their progress. "Now, soldier, cut the hay," said the Scarecrow's head, which was still held by Woot the Wanderer. "I'd like to, but I can't stoop over with my bent leg without falling," replied Captain Fighter. "What can we do about that leg, anyhow?" asked Woot, appealing to Polychrome. She danced around in a circle several times without replying, and the boy feared she had not heard him. But the Rainbow's daughter was merely thinking upon the problem, and presently she paused beside the Tin Soldier and said, "I've been taught a little fairy magic, but I've never before been asked to mend tin legs with it, so I'm not sure I can help you. It all depends on the good will of my unseen fairy guardians, so I'll try, and if I fail, you will be no worse off than you are now." She danced around the circle again, and then laid both hands upon the twisted tin leg and sang in her sweet voice, "Fairy powers, come to my aid. This bent leg of tin is made. Make it straight and strong and true, and I will render thanks to you." "Ah," murmured Captain Fighter in a glad voice, as she withdrew her hands and danced away, and they saw he was standing straight as ever, because his leg was as shapely and strong as it had been before his accident. The Tin Woodman had watched Polychrome with much interest, and he now said, "Please, take the dent out of my side, Polly, for I am more crippled than was the soldier." So the Rainbow's daughter touched his side lightly and sang, "Here's a dent by accident. Such a thing was never meant. Fairy powers so wondrous great make our dear Tin Woodman straight." "Good!" cried the Emperor, again standing erect and strutting around to show his fine figure. Your fairy magic may not be able to accomplish all things, sweet Polychrome, but it works splendidly on tin. Thank you very much." "The hay? The hay?" pleaded the Scarecrow's head. "Oh, yes, the hay," said Woot. "What are you waiting for, Captain Fighter?" At once the tin soldier set to work cutting hay with his sword, and in a few minutes there was quite enough with which to stuff the Scarecrow's body. Woot and Polychrome did this, and it was no easy task, because the hay packed together more than straw, and as they had little experience in such work, their job, when completed, left the Scarecrow's arms and leg rather bunchy. Also, there was a hump on his back which made Woot laugh and say it reminded him of a camel. But it was the best they could do, and when the head was fastened on to the body, they asked the Scarecrow how he felt. "A little heavy and not quite natural," he cheerfully replied, "but I'll get along somehow until we reach a straw stack. Don't laugh at me, please, because I'm a little ashamed of myself, and I don't want to regret a good action." They started at once in the direction of Mount Munch, and as the Scarecrow proved very clumsy in his movements, Woot took one of his arms and the Tin Woodman the other, and so helped their friend to walk in a straight line. And the Rainbow's Daughter, as before, danced ahead of them and behind them and all around them, and they never minded her odd ways, because to them she was like a ray of sunshine. The end of chapter 19.